don't have an answer to. You don't have an answer to that question. Let me put a different question.
No, I have an answer. The answer is I don't remember.
Okay. Okay, you don't remember what you meant. Now let me try to ask you.
I don't remember what I was thinking.
Is there a difference between remembering what you were thinking and remembering what you meant?
If the question is what I meant when I wrote it, no.
Okay. So you don't remember what you were thinking when you wrote it, and you don't remember what you meant when you wrote it. Is that fair?
As well as not remember writing it.
Okay. Now, let me go on to another paragraph and see whether you remember writing that or not. And that is the second paragraph, which reads, quote, apparently a lot of OEMs are bundling non-Microsoft browsers and coming up with offerings together with internet service providers that get displayed on their machines in a far, and you've capitalized each of the letters in far, more prominent way than MSN or our internet browser, close quote. Do you see that? Did you write that sentence, Mr. Gates?
I don't remember, but I have no reason to doubt that I did.
Do you remember what you were thinking when you wrote that sentence, or what you meant when you wrote that sentence?
No.
Do you remember that in January 1996, a lot of OEMs were bundling non-Microsoft browsers?
I'm not sure.
What were the non-Microsoft browsers that you were concerned about in January of 1996?
What's the question? Are you trying to get me to recall what other browsers I was thinking about when I wrote that sentence?
No, because you told me that you don't know what you were thinking about when you wrote that sentence.
Right.
What I'm trying to do is get you to tell me what non-Microsoft browsers you were concerned about in January of 1996.
Well, if it had been only one, I probably would have used the name of it. Instead, I seem to be using the term non-Microsoft browsers.
My question is, what non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996?
I'm sure. What's the question? Is it, are you asking me about when I wrote this email, or what are you asking me about?
I'm asking you about January of 1996.
That month.
Yes, sir.
And what about it?
What non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996?
I don't know what you mean concerned.
What is it about the word concerned that you don't understand?
I'm not sure what you mean by it. Is there a document where I use that term?
Is the term concerned a term that you're familiar with in the English language?
Yes.
Does it have a meaning that you're familiar with?
Yes.
Using the word concerned, consistent with the normal meaning that it has in the English language, what Microsoft or what non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996?
Well, I think I would have been concerned about Internet Explorer, what was going on with it. We would have been looking at other browsers that were in use at the time. Certainly Navigator was one of those. And I don't know which browser AOL was using at the time, but it was another browser.
What I'm asking, Mr. Gates, is what other browsers or what non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996? Not asking what you were looking at, although that may be part of the answer, and I don't mean to exclude it. But what non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996?
Well, our concern was to provide the best internet support, among other things, in Windows. And in dealing with that concern, I'm sure we looked at competitive products, including the ones I mentioned.
Let me I'll try to use your words and see if we can move this along. What competitive products did you look at in January of 1996 in terms of browsers?
I don't remember looking at any specific products during that month.
Were there specific competitive products that in January of 1996 you wanted to increase Microsoft's share with respect to those products?
Objection.
Do you understand the question, Mr. Gates?
I'm pausing to see if I can understand it.
If you don't understand it, I'd be happy to rephrase it.
Well, go ahead and rephrase it. I probably could have understood it if I thought about it, but go ahead.
Okay. In January 1996, you were aware that there were non-Microsoft browsers that were being marketed. Is that correct?
I can't really confine it to that month, but I'm sure in that time period I was aware of other browsers being out.
And were those non-Microsoft browsers, or at least some of them, being marketed in competition with Microsoft's browser?
Users were making choices about which browser to select.
Is the term competition a term that you're familiar with, Mr. Gates?
Yes.
And does it have a meaning in the English language that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I haven't. Any lack of understanding of your questions doesn't stem from the use of that word.
Okay. And you understand what is meant by non-Microsoft browsers, do you not, sir?
No.
You don't? Is that what you're telling me? You don't understand what that means?
You have to be more specific.
Do you understand what is meant by non-Microsoft browsers?
In the right context, I'd understand that.
Is the term non-Microsoft browser term that you think has a reasonably common and understandable meaning in the industry?
Yeah, it's only the scope of what you'd include in that would vary according to the context.
Okay. That is, in some context you'd include more, and in some context
That's right.
you'd include less. When you refer to non-Microsoft browsers generally, are there particular browsers that you have in mind?
There are many that I would include in that, and as I said, it'd be broader depending on the context.
Do all of the non-Microsoft browsers that you're aware of compete with Internet Explorer?
In the sense that users select which browser they want to use, yes.
Now let's focus on January of 1996. What were the non-Microsoft browsers that, in your view, were competing with Internet Explorer in January of 1996?
Or users could choose from a number of browsers, including the original Mosaic browser, the Netscape Navigator, and I don't know what version they had out at the time, the AOL browser, and some others that were in the market.
And using the term, as you use the term, were all of those three browsers competing with Internet Explorer in January of 1996?
In the sense that users could choose to use them or use Internet Explorer, yes.
I want to use it the way you use it, not the way somebody else might use it, Mr. Gates. What I want to know is that in January 1996, did you consider Mosaic, Navigator, and AOL's browser as all competing with Internet Explorer?
In the sense that users could select one of those others to choose, yes.
And is that the only sense that you use the term competition?
No.
Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to focus on competition the way you use it in the ordinary operation of your business.
And one of the senses is whether people choose to use our way of providing a feature or if they choose to get additional software to provide them with that feature.
And was that the choice that users were making between Internet Explorer and the AOL browser in January of 1996, Mr. Gates?
Users had that choice between those two.
Were they making that choice, Mr. Gates, insofar as you're aware?
Some were, yes.
And some were choosing the AOL browser instead of Internet Explorer? That's your testimony?
Well, people can switch at any time and they can intermix their usage. But yes, some people chose to primarily use the AOL browser.
Instead of Internet Explorer is your testimony?
Well, when they use it primarily, that means it's got most of their usage share. And that means nothing else does. So, and some let's take somebody who exclusively would have used the AOL browser. I can't name anybody like that, but I'm sure there were people like that. That would mean they weren't using the Internet Explorer technologies in Windows.
And because of that, as you use the term competition, you would consider that a competitive alternative. That's what you said, is that correct?
In terms of competing for usage share, yes.
And what you've testified is that when you use browser share, you meant usage share, correct? That's what you said.
That's right.
So that as you use the term browser share, it is your testimony that in January 1996, Microsoft was competing for browser share with Mosaic, Navigator, and AOL's browser, correct?
In the sense that users would choose to use one of those in varying degrees, yes.
But in terms of what you meant by browser share, that was what you considered to be competition in January of 1996, correct?
That we were competing to see who could make the better browser that users would choose to take advantage of, yes.
And you were competing with the supplier of Mosaic and the supplier of Navigator and the supplier of AOL's browser to do that. Is that your testimony?
I know we were interested in making our browser attractive so that we'd gain higher usage share.
Higher usage share compared to?
All the other browsers, including particularly those browsers.
Okay. Now, in January of 1996, did you consider any one of those three browsers to be a stronger or more important competitor than any of the others?
It's hard for me to pin it down to January 1996. At some point, we definitely thought of the Netscape browser as the number one in terms of how our Windows browsing would be compared by users and which they would select.
Have you finished your answer?
Mm-hmm.
When did you first consider Netscape's browser to be your primary or most important non-Microsoft browser with which Internet Explorer was competing?
I think by late 1995, we thought of Navigator as competing competing with Windows broadly, including the internet capabilities of Windows.
Prior to late 1995, did you think of the Netscape browser as competing either broadly with Windows or with Internet Explorer?
No, I think prior to that, we were unclear about whether that was the case.
Let me try to go back now to the first sentence in your memo of January 5, 1996, that has been marked as Exhibit 358, where it says winning internet browser share is a very, very important goal for us. Does the prior discussion that we've just had refresh your recollection that you would have been referring primarily there to the goal of gaining market share versus Netscape?
You keep trying to read Netscape into that sentence, and I don't see how you can do that.
Well, I just really want to get your testimony,
Okay.
Mr. Gates. And that is, when you wrote winning internet browser share is a very, very important goal for us in January 1996, were you referring primarily to gaining market share compared to Netscape?
I've testified I don't remember what I was thinking when I wrote that sentence.
If you can't remember what you meant when you wrote that sentence, do you at least remember that in January 1996, winning internet browser share was an important goal for Microsoft?
Yes.
And with respect to the goal of winning internet browser share in 1996, was that goal primarily to gain share compared to Netscape?
Not necessarily.
When you talk about winning browser share, not necessarily just in this document, but generally, you're referring to gaining market share compared to other competitors, correct?
Or any new products that come along
That are competitive, correct?
that people use for that function.
In January of 1996, was it the case that the most important competitive product to Internet Explorer was Netscape's browser?
I think by this time, the browser that had the highest usage share was Netscape's Navigator.
Could you read the question back, please?
In January of 1996, was it the case that the most important competitive product to Internet Explorer was Netscape's browser?
Can you answer that question, sir?
in terms of users picking browsers, the product that was on the market that competed for usage the most in this time period was probably Netscape's Navigator.
Okay. Was the fact that you just described a fact that caused you and Microsoft to want to study Netscape and determine how you could reduce Netscape's ability to compete?
Objection.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by that.
In or about January of 1996 or thereafter, did Microsoft try to study Netscape to determine how you could reduce Netscape's ability to compete?
Objection.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Let me try to break it up into as small pieces as I can. In or about January 1996 or thereafter, did Microsoft, to your knowledge, undertake to try to study Netscape as a company, including where its revenues came from, what its dependencies were, what it needed to remain viable?
I'm sure we looked at their revenue, and I'm sure we looked at their products and their organizational structure.
Was that in whole or in part a result of an attempt to find out what their vulnerabilities were? Mr. Gates?
Objection.
Did you end the question?
Both your counsel and I had thought so.
Okay.
But if you don't understand it, I'll rephrase it.
We were interested in learning what users liked about their products and what kind of response customers had.
For my present question, I'm not asking about learning about their products just for the sake of learning about their products. What I'm asking about is whether you were trying to figure out where Netscape's dependencies were so that you could attack Netscape and render Netscape a less effective competitor.
Objection.
We were interested in building a product that users would prefer over them.
My question, sir, is whether, in addition to whatever